Hello and welcome to this walkthrough video in which we will discuss the other English-speaking world, that is Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Some of the main points to remember here are that, one, Canada is a young, progressive nation, a mosaic of cultures, ethnicities, languages, and politics. That the idea of Canada has been shaped by its sheer size. It's large, there's lots of space. That the role Canada plays on the world stage in contemporary world politics is quite understated, especially in comparison to its southern neighbor, the United States. In talking about Australia and New Zealand, the prehistory and history is first and foremost that of the indigenous peoples and the Aboriginals. And that the effects of European settlement on both Australia and New Zealand has been profound, indeed very significant. So let's talk about Canada. What do you already know? Well, of course, there are some of the typical stereotypes here. We see, the notion that every Canadian wears flannel, is rugged, drinks maple syrup and Molson beer, eats at Tim Hortons, and that they all share this typical "about, sorry, accent." Whereas in reality, Canada is a cultural mosaic. There is no one stereotype. It is a very young nation state, which does appear to present as heterogeneous, that is, having basically one population. But it is home to a wild and wide variety of original and immigrant languages, cultures, and ethnicities. And that in spite of its progressive politics, it is quite liberal. The First Nations peoples, that is, the indigenous peoples, still remain marginalized. Except for a few urban areas, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Canada has a very low population density. And it is big. How big? Well, to give it some scale, in comparison to the Netherlands, perhaps that explains it. The Netherlands in yellow on the side, and yeah, indeed, Canada is large. So how indeed does its sheer size play a role in its economics, its politics, its cultures? Well, let's take a look at a few Canadian politicians, okay? Who are these folks? Any idea? Probably not. Why do you not know most of these important Canadian politicians? Because Canada's role in global politics is quite understated. You'd think that because of its size, it would be a more important political entity, and also because of its proximity to the US, but that is not the case. A practice history exam question, interestingly, fun fact: who is Canada's head of state? Is it Trudeau? In this case, it would be the English king, not queen. The PowerPoint's a bit outdated. The president of the United States, or Canada has no head of state? Well, if you guessed that it would actually be the monarch of England, that is true. The English monarch is the head of state for Canada. Moving forward, let's talk about Australia and New Zealand. We see some iconic photos here. What do we already know? Well, some fun facts in terms of history: that James Cook mapped New Zealand and the east coast of Australia in the mid to late 1700s. That the British colonies were basically established Australia and New Zealand as extensions of the colony of New South Wales, and that many people from Australia also settled in New Zealand, and this included criminals, ex-convicts, farmers, and miners, much like in the United States and parts of Canada, there was a gold rush. There was a search for fortune in gold. Interestingly, the citizens of New Zealand and Australia can move about working and living freely in both countries. So by 1960, 1 in 50 Maori lived in Australia. But by 2011, that number rose. 1 in 6 Maori lived in Australia. And Australia has 4 times the population of New Zealand. Let's talk about the Maori in New Zealand. These people make up approximately 8% of New Zealand's population, and they have considerable political clout, power. They even have seats specifically reserved for them in Parliament. And the Maori language is an official language in New Zealand. It is recognized by the government, it's taught in schools, it's used in the media. Unlike Australia, where the Aboriginals are less cohesive a group. They speak some 250 native languages. And this lack of cohesion, lack of homogeneity, means that they have little political power and a low profile in Australia. So quite a different set of circumstances. Who indeed were the first inhabitants of Australia? Well, if you guessed the Aboriginals, you would be correct. Which European discovered Australia? Now, why do we put that in quotes? Because, of course, Australia was already there. When we say discovered, it means, which colonist or world traveler put this nation or this region on the map. Well, that was Captain Cook. How did Australia's original people, its inhabitants, survive thousands of years ago? They were hunter-gatherers. And what kind of colonist did England initially send in great numbers to Australia? If you guessed convicts, criminals, you would be correct. Which European discovered New Zealand? Well, that would be Tasman. And here we have 4 historical events as we wrap up. And they are currently in random order. The American Declaration of Independence, following the War of Independence, the establishment of the New South Wales colony in Australia, the reign of Elizabeth I in England, and the Boer Wars in yet another English-speaking country, South Africa. How do these rank? Which one happened first and which one most recently? Well, if you guessed that the reign of Elizabeth I was first, back in the 1500s, then in the late 1700s, the American War of Independence and the Declaration. Then in also the late 1700s, but approximately 20 years on, the establishment of the New South Wales colony in Australia. And then in the 1800s, the Boer Wars in South Africa. These are the historical events in order. All right. Now, hopefully, this has been instructive. This is the last bit of input for our semester. We will continue preparing for the exam and talking about the English-speaking world. But goodbye for now. Thanks for watching.